We're just staring at our three ugly mugs right now. So don't worry about that. But again, the interaction will be through the Q&A and also the chat. If you go over to the more button and hit chat, you can actually, interact with us live there. So anyways, thanks again for joining. This is an interesting time of the year with COVID and COVID and end of the year in general is always crazy for the three of us. But we're heading into Q4, and that's a very busy time of the season. A lot of sellers looking to sell, a lot of buyers looking to buy, but we thought it would be a really good idea to do this now to help you all that are potentially going through the process today and potentially thinking about getting into ownership in January, early next year. So I'm your host and presenter, Mike Dinsio. I'm founder of Next Level Consultants. For those of you that know me or have interacted with me in the past, I'm a recovering banker, I like to say. It's a brutal life, and I'm glad I'm out of it. But it was a really good opportunity for me to really get into the dental industry and touch a lot of dental deals and get that experience. Made a lot of friends, I just really love being a part of this industry. But I got into consulting because I saw that there was a need for representation for buyers. As a banker, you kind of end up being that buyer's rep. But as a banker, you're a little bit limited into what you can actually tell your client for liability reasons. And so I got out of banking right into consulting. To date, I think we've helped about 50 doctors. I can't believe I'm saying that, but it has been that many. We also have a practice management division that helps docs post-close manage their practice and really take it from where it's at to thriving and growing. So thanks for having me. Thanks for being on board. Tonight, the other two presenters are Rod Johnston, owner and founder of Omni Practice Group. I love having Rod on because he actually is on the opposite side of the table with my deals a lot of the time, and I'm the buyer's rep and he's the seller's rep. And what's really great is our friendship and partnership over the years. Rod, you're probably one of the few people that have done a lot more deals than I have here locally anyways, and so I respect Rod a ton. And this is a cool event because this is the time that you get to hear from the seller, and he's here serving you. And now's a great time to ask him the questions that you might not be able to ask him when he's representing one of his clients and he's across the table. So Rod, thanks for being here, bud. And
I'm glad to be here.
yeah, it's great to have you both. Tyler Jones, attorney and partner at Health Cell Fetterman. I always screw that name up, but I think I got it right. Tyler, did I get it right this time?
Nice. 1 for 1,000.
One. It's about right. Just more recently got the title of partner, so congratulations. Not too long ago, my friend. It's a big accomplishment, and it's a hats off to you. Your service to the industry is awesome, and again, value your partnership. You're oftentimes representing my clients when it comes to legal advice. You're my go-to, and of course, you're on the opposite side of the table sometimes, and I'm bummed when that happens, but had to have you on the program to really walk us through the legal aspects of this business. So thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's just jump right into it. I've been putting this slide up on a lot of my presentations because we are in the world of the COVID, right? And it's challenging, and it's raising different questions. And as a buyer's rep, when I look at these deals, I get the question a lot. How is this situation affecting these transitions? And we're going to go over some of that. But in anything, the Chinese symbol for crisis actually means danger and opportunity. It's actually both, which is super cool to me because in crisis, you can look at a situation as an opportunity or potentially a danger situation. And so, whenever there's a situation, there's always opportunity, and I try to find opportunity as an entrepreneur. And those of you looking to get into practice, it's an opportunity. And so, yes, absolutely, there are some risks that you do want to navigate yourself through to not get yourself in a bad spot. But there's also a lot of opportunity there. A lot of practices being purchased today, and sometimes better priced. Rod will probably talk a little bit about that. Some of them not, and rightfully so. So I just wanted to point out that weird times for sure, but not necessarily the worst thing in the world either. The 5 things that I'm going to go over tonight are probably the things that the 5 things that I really get a lot of questions about, whether it being during the actual transition itself at the end of the sale, and even before the sale. So here's my agenda for tonight. So, what is the real profit of the practice? It's so important. Most of my clients aren't quite sure about how much that practice is making and what that waterfall looks like at the end of the funnel once you run it through the expenses, and how that relates with your personal expenses and so on and so forth. But can you really buy a practice if you don't know how much the practice is making? And so we're going to go a little bit into that. Can you get financed? I will tell you right now, in today's world, it's a little bit different than it was when I was a banker. It's still pretty easy, so that's going to be the theme of tonight, but just different nuances. So we're going to cover a little bit of that. Should you buy accounts receivables? I get this question all the time. We're going to go through that, some of the pros and cons of that. I had to mention credentialing and just the insurance company situation as you go into these transitions. It's always a bugger. I'm going to want Tyler to not say anything about some of my advice tonight, because he's the lawyer in the room, and he's got to say what he has to say. But as a consultant, I can tell you there's a strategy there for sure, and we can talk about it. And then lastly, how are you going to grow this practice? So once you buy it, how are you going to grow it? And you got to think about that going into it, because these practices, there will be attrition 100% of the time. I was in a doctor practice today that we just transitioned. Rod, it was as a doctor that you and I worked with, buyer seller side, and he's doing really well, and the transition went perfect actually. But he is still getting charts being sent to other doctors. It happens. I think only 3 in the last 4 weeks, which is not bad, but it's gonna happen. There's things you just can't avoid, and so you got to figure out how you're going to grow that practice once you get it to offset the attrition. So that's my agenda tonight. Let's get into it. My computer isn't freezing. You guys can hear me, right? Yes? Okay. So profit. Profit. Oh, I went too far. So does the practice make money? That's the first question I get asked is how much money is this practice making? Rod actually taught me this one. If you think about a practice, you got 2 practice scenarios. You got one practice making $1 million and profiting $300K, and another practice collecting $1 million but netting $500K. So exact same practice at the top. Sorry if I'm stealing your thunder, Rod. At the top of the line. At the bottom of the line, they're completely different, right? And so should those practices be valued the same? The answer is no. But there's always X factors to that scenario, and Rod will probably get into valuations tonight. But at the end of the day, you got to know how much the practice is making. And it comes down to personal expenses versus business expenses. And you're going to see in the prospectuses what the brokers say are adjustments or add backs. And basically what that means is what is the seller writing off as expenses personally so that he doesn't have to have such a tax burden at the end of the year. So there are things that you can expense that are actually benefits to you. And the easy ones that I'm thinking of are like auto, your car payments, or maybe a retirement plan. I see oftentimes, wives being, or even husbands being added to admin wages, but they don't actually work in the practice. Looking at a practice right now where the hygienist is the daughter, and she's being overpaid, and the seller knows that. But these are all things that you're going to want to adjust, because when you take over, those aren't real expenses. You got to adjust that back in. You got to figure out what the real profit is. Once you figure that out, then you're going to want to really look at the practice and see if it's making, if the profitability is what it should be. And as a practice consultant, I'm always looking at the expenses that might be too high, and some of those I labeled down there. But is that opportunity for you to manage tighter to ultimately gain more profit post close? And supplies is an easy one. I see supplies sometimes being 10%, and you can easily get that down to 5 to 6%, and so on and so forth. So you're going to want to evaluate that. But the bottom line, the question that you got to ask yourself is can you afford the practice? And I say that because when we're going to get to the banker slide next, but anytime you're looking at practice, you're looking at the practice, but you also got to look at you and your situation as well, and how that relates. So you figure out what the practice purchase is, but then you've got your personal expenses. Then you got to cover the practice loan, and then what else is there that you're not thinking of? A lot of these transitions have zero marketing plan. Are you going to have to Are you going to have to get aggressive with marketing to grow the practice? Are you going to have to hire another admin because maybe it's understaffed? Are you going to have to maybe hire an associate because you can't handle all of the production? So you really got to factor in the what else. And at the end of the day, bottom line, net, do you have enough money to live off of? And that's what it comes down to. So profit, of course, obviously it's a really big one, but hopefully, we shined a light a little bit more on that a little bit more in detail. Again, ask questions, y'all. I can't encourage that enough. We are going to get to them, but as I go through these slides, Tyler goes through his slides, Rod goes through his slides, ask the questions, and then we'll get to them if they're top of mind. Okay, financing. We're in a weird world, back to COVID. So I can tell you that it is harder to get a loan today. Fact, all of us on the panel would agree with that. However, they're absolutely lending, and their criteria, though, may be a little bit more stringent than it was a year ago. And so let's go through some of these things. So bottom line, can you afford the payments, right? So we just went through that. The banker's going to do that exact same calculation. How much is the practice making? What are your personal expenses? And that's the key. What are your personal expenses? College debts, cars, all that. Loan payment, of course, and then anything else that they need to factor in based on the business plan or the situation. So number one, can you afford it? Number two, are you a producer? What's a producer? A producer is probably, well, bottom line, can you produce what that practice is doing? So if that practice is producing $1 million and you back out the hygiene production, can you do the doctor production? And that's going to be a little subjective. So can you show reports to the bank that you can handle that production? So start capturing your reports at your associate positions now that can prove to the bank that you can produce what you're looking to buy. Some questions about that, please ask, but fee schedules play into that. Lots of things factor into that, but are you a producer? Okay, cash. This is probably the most annoying one, right? Panelists, cash on hand, probably the most annoying one. So how much cash do you have on hand, aka liquidity? Doesn't have to be cash, could be market securities, cannot be retirement plans, but if Mount St. Helen blew right now and you needed to get out of Dodge, how much cash can you get a hold of? and verify. Of course, you have to verify that. They're looking for the bank's 10%, which can be high on the bigger practices for sure. I've gotten around this by getting guarantors or gifts from rich uncles or friends. But that definitely is one that they're looking at doing. So if you don't have a huge amount of cash on hand, start saving. Stop sending it to student payments because you're worried about the debt management there, and start hoarding cash or start fundraising with friends or rich uncles and whatnot. But yeah, that's definitely going to be one. Or maybe buy a smaller practice. You know, if you're looking at $1 million practice, they're going to look at $100,000 of cash, 10%. So maybe you can't get $1 million practice, but maybe you get a $500,000 practice, and that's only 50 grand in liquidity. So maybe a smaller practice could work. Okay, another big thing: has the practice rebounded? Now, we've gotten some emails, and I forwarded it to you guys about, these practices, how are they being valued, and have they rebounded? So at the end of the day, you gotta make sure the practice has rebounded. If a practice is still down, less than 75% of where they were in 2019, something's going on, and Rod would agree with that, because in today's world, everybody really kind of has rebounded, and maybe they're not going to be 100%. But they're probably pretty close to that 80% mark, and that's what the banks are looking for. The banks aren't going to beat you up or beat a practice up if it's somewhere around that 80% mark. But the practices that my team at Next Level are managing, we're almost 100%. What we found was there was a rush of hygiene appointments that came in, and we really did catch up. So maybe 10% down max, but I just haven't seen that on the solid practices. So the banks are absolutely looking at that. Number 5, is the practice overvalued? I'm going to put it in quotes because to the banks, if it's overvalued, they're not going to want to lend you as much based on what they think the practice valued. And so that's a real thing. So sometimes there's carrybacks involved. Sometimes you might have to put money down. Maybe we just need to do a price concession. I don't know. But they seem to be lending slightly less than they did a year ago. And Rod and I have to deal with that on an everyday basis. As always, the lease is going to be a concern. And of course, the non-compete is going to be the concern. But these really are the 7 things. Biggest thing here is they're stressing some of these a little bit harder than they were a year ago. So for the most part, it's the same, but they are really holding true to the liquidity one, and they definitely are looking at the rebound from COVID. But all in all, they're lending, and everything for the most part is fairly normal. Okay, cash receivables, one of my favorites. And Rod and Tyler know why, and I hope you two, from your perspective, I really want you guys to touch on this too, but I'm going to break it down from my perspective, because I get to see my clients on the front end as we value the accounts receivables and what they're worth, and if we should buy them or not buy them. And then I get to see it post-close and how that affects the buyer post-close. And it's really, really interesting. So I'm going to tell you, as a general rule, you can read these bullet points. I'm pro buy accounts receivables for a lot of reasons. There absolutely are cases where I'm not, and we can go through some of those. But for the most part, I'm going to go down the list real quick. All the money post-close, if you buy the receivables, all the money that comes into the practice is yours. It's really easy to manage. You don't have to deal with the ins and outs of the cash for the seller. If you buy them, it's all yours. You bought them. Less patient confusion. I've seen a lot of this. Oh, well, our balance with you, Mr. Jones is X, but you still have something that, Dr. Rod Johnston, you and him need to square up on some other stuff. It's confusing to the patient, and they don't want to deal with that. It's nice if you buy the accounts receivables, then hey, guess what? You owe me the money. Super easy. I will tell you, the admin team, they need to be really organized, and that's actually on the other side too. If you don't buy the accounts receivables, that admin team has to be super organized. And if they're not, it's a train wreck. I've been a part of it post close. And then the easy one is you make money. You make money on the deal, about 15 cents per dollar roughly. And so it's easy money. In the market right now, I looked at my 401k just the other day, and I'm at 20%. We've been in a great market, but 15% return on money is not bad for sure. So that's another advantage. If you don't buy accounts receivables, the other option is take working capital directly from the bank, and that's taking cash, putting it in your checking account, and you're using that money to pay your bills. It is predictable. It's 100%. You got the money. It's yours. Accounts receivables, you still got to collect it. So there's a little risk there. Sometimes getting working capital, you're going to have more money. Sometimes you might have more money receivables. It just depends. I do want to remind everybody that if you don't buy accounts receivables, it's actually a liability, and Tyler will probably go into that. You're on the hook for collecting that for the seller. So Tyler, hopefully you go through that. I'm sure you will. I say this is ironic that the admin team must be organized. The times that I don't suggest we buy accounts receivables, follow me on this, is when the accounts receivables are a mess, right? And if the accounts receivables are a mess, the admin team is not organized, right? So if you take if you take working capital instead of buying, right? The admin team is going to have to manage collecting all the money, and they're already bad at managing the accounts receivables. So it tends to be a mess. And so I guess big picture, I would prefer you buy the accounts receivables, just because for your sake, it's going to be much easier for you. I'm going to go through a quick scenario too. I get this a lot, and I had to cover this in the presentation. This is new. Rod, Tyler, you guys will appreciate this. So a couple of times I've had a few buyers call me post close, and they're like, Mike, I have $0 in my checking. This is if they bought the accounts receivables. Mike, I bought the accounts receivables, and at the closing, I have $1,000 in my checking account. I just bought $1 million practice. I'm in debt $1 million, and I have $1,000 in my checking account. What the hell did you get me into? So if you take the accounts receivables, day one, you're broke. And you're supposed to be broke, by the way. You're supposed to be. It's because you wrote a check to the seller. But literally the next day, when you take ownership, the check that comes in from receivables is yours, not theirs. And so over the next 15 days, you'll probably get a flood of 10 grand or more. And that same buyer, that was the exact same situation. The funny thing is Rod will smile because this was also his deal. Literally, we closed on Tuesday. He was broke like that gentleman is. On Wednesday, the practice was closed. Okay, he associated that day, actually. He just had it worked out with that associate position. On Thursday, he came in for work, and his account had $5 grand in it from the Wednesday that he hadn't even worked. So he started getting all of his money. So in 15 days, he had racked up 20 grand, and he was totally fine. But the day of closing, that's what he went through. Working capital, it's actually the opposite. The day one, you close and you get a ton of money at 50 grand. You got a Brinks truck just backed up into your bank and just dropped 50, 60, sometimes $100,000 into your account. You're loaded. But over the next 45 days, that account's going to slowly go down because you got to pay all the bills. And all of the accounts receivables is supposed to be going to the seller because you didn't buy it. So that checking account's going to get weirdly low. And then over time, it'll grow again. So I just want everybody to realize the ebbs and flows of the cash flow. And I have to go over this because I've been in it a few times now where buyers are just freaking out that the day they close they have no money. And Tyler, I'm sure you guys have gotten those calls. So I just had to go through that. All right, and I'm really going through quick here. Sorry for rushing. I guess I'm a little passionate tonight. Maybe too much Red Bull. But questions? I see no questions. That's unfortunate, you all. So get some questions in now. See in the chat box. Maybe you guys are asking questions on the chat box. Try to funnel those over the Q&A, but we'll get to them. Okay, the insurance situation. This is my emoji slide for us millennials and zennials. So insurance companies suck, no doubt. They definitely have some advantages, though, and we can have that debate sometime later in a different webinar. But in a transition, they're very, very, very important. So many things could go wrong with insurances, in-network, out-of-network. If you don't accept the ones that the seller did, problem. If you don't get the same fee schedule that the seller had, problem. So lots of problems here with insurances. That's why I've got the cuss word up there. So, fee for service, great. If you have a fee for service practice that you're buying, good for you, but maybe not, by the way, because fee for service has its own challenges. Maybe those patients don't trust you like they trusted the other seller. And so could be a problem. Number two, I typically see this 85-15 rule, 85% dependent on PPO, insurance, 15% fee for service. That varies up and down, could be 80-20, but it's somewhere in there, okay? So you want to get a complete list from the broker, from the seller. Hey, what are all the in-network insurance companies that you offer? Because that's really important. And you also want to get their fee schedules, because if you don't get the fee schedule the same, day one, problem. And so here's the thing. You want to apply and get credentialing done as soon as humanly possible, okay? Warning, and Rod, you'll talk about this, I'm sure. You don't want to tip off the staff. That's not good for you. That's not good for the seller. If the staff knows about the transition, they might say, peace, I'm gone. And then you don't have a hygienist. And good luck getting a hygienist in COVID. So you don't want to tip off the staff. And so this is the catch-22 that a lot of buyers and sellers have. So it's also on that number 2, fill out the paperwork correctly. Simply not checking the right box on that very confusing application could be the difference of you getting the fee schedule for Delta down here instead of getting the fee schedule that the seller has for Delta up here. Literally, it just happened. And so you got to fill out your paperwork right. A lot of buyers get cheap here and they don't hire professionals that fill out these applications on a daily. They know what they're doing. You might even get them to negotiate your fees for you. It's going to cost you a fee, but it's worth it, because if you accept that fee schedule without the professionals help and you don't click on that wrong box and you get the wrong, you agree to that Delta fee schedule, you're stuck with it for 2 years. And that could cost you thousands of dollars over the next 2 years by not having the same fee schedule as the seller. Okay, I hope all your heads are shaking yes in the audience. I can't see you, but that's a huge one. Now, one of the things that Rod and I and other brokers and sellers try to do is we try to get the seller to play ball with us. Now, you'll notice there's a bullet point that says, Tyler, shut up. This is that moment where he's going to want to go on record and say, don't do it, because he's an attorney, and I get that. But I'm telling you right now, the dental insurance companies have worked with me 100% of the time for a period of time, not forever, but for a period of time during the transition. You could probably bill through the seller's company, EIN, provider number, all that stuff. You can bill through them for a period of time if the seller agrees to that, if Rod can get the seller to agree to that. And sometimes they don't want to, because there's some challenges there. But Actually, there's no challenge. It's just there's a risk that they may not want to take on because they maybe asked Tyler and Tyler said don't do it because the insurance companies will tell Tyler not that they can't. So that's why I got the praying hands. You're praying that the seller might let you do that, but there is a catch-22 there with the insurances. So I just want you to remember, patients are going to come in day one, and you're either going to be in network or out of network, and you got to have the conversation with that patient that says, hey, we're out of network right now, and I know I'm new, but I promise I'll do you right. You know, that's a weird conversation to have with patients. So try to get ahead of that sooner than later. Okay. I see some questions down there, so that's great. Hopefully they're about that. My last little tip is, what is your growth plan? And this is really where my practice management side of my business kicks in is you got to have a game plan for growth day one. You got to, because you just can't do the transaction or the transition and just hope that you're going to be able to manage it exactly the same, because you won't. You're just two different people. There's culture things, there's demographic things, there's just things, and you got to grow it. So number one, marketing strategy. You got to get a marketing strategy. Internal marketing works better. It's cheaper, it works, it's hard work. You know, it's sometimes uncomfortable to ask for reviews and do your social media and all that good stuff, but it's what works, and it is the cheapest. You just gotta have the courage to work on it, put yourself out there on social media and all that. Okay, what everybody does is external marketing, and that's the expensive stuff. That's the mailers, the pay-per-click, the websites, the radio, the billboards, the magazine. It's a mix of that, and you gotta spend a lot of money to do that. The average is about $200 to $300. Well, it's debatable. Some people say as low as $100 a new patient. I've seen more of $200 to $300 a new patient. And so get a game plan quickly right out of the gate. And don't change the name, okay? Everybody changes the name. Don't change the name till later, because there's a lot of SEO value in the website. Of course, if it's, you know, Rod Johnston DDS and you're buying it, you might want to do that. You might want to rechange, but there's just got to be a game plan there is all I'm saying. Okay, number two, the second biggest thing that we find a lot of growth in is the hygiene department. We're finding that perio is being way underdiagnosed. Recare systems in hygiene is not solid, not clean. We like to see 90% recare. I think the average is about the industry average is about 70. We see somewhere close to 50 to 60%. So you want to quickly look at your hygiene department. You got to look at the X-ray protocols. I've seen a lot of weirdness where people aren't doing FMXs more than 10 years, every 10 years and such. And so big picture, there's a lot of opportunity in hygiene when you really focus on it. It's the business within the business. And I have a hygiene consultant that helps me coach all of our clients post-close, specifically in hygiene and how to get that business ramped up. So hygiene. And then the last thing is treatment planning. Rod, you and I have seen this many times in the last 12 months, and how the treatment planning is different. And you know, are you more aggressive? Are you more conservative? I have ways to look at a practice to see if they're conservative or not. I have my ratios and things that I look at. But big picture, if you're more conservative, that's going to be a problem. And you got to be real with yourself. Are you? But, you know, going into a practice and doing more x-rays, doing intraoral camera pictures, co-diagnosing with your hygiene department, better handoffs, better financial arrangements, all of these things increase case acceptance. And you got to really get into those systems when you get into some of these practices, because I got to be honest, these sellers, they're just kind of on easy street, coast, Rod. I mean, am I wrong about that? Most of them are coasting.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, so their treatment plan and protocols and team, they're just not up here. They're just kind of coasting. And the new owners, you guys got to pay the loan after the transaction. You got to pay the loan. They didn't have a loan. They paid it off 20 years ago. And so the cash flow looks different for them. They don't have to press harder on treatment. They don't have to invest in intraoral cameras and train the team on using them. They don't need the financial arrangements. It just is what it is. So big picture, to me, those are the quick ways to grow practice easily. Get a game plan, put it in place, be a leader, and know exactly what you want to do day one. Otherwise, you might be 6 months into it, and all of a sudden you're looking at your production reports and you're like, what the hell happened? So those are my top 5. I love what I do. It's my last final tidbit. Passionate about ownership. I started Next Level. I own it. It was the best move I ever could have made. I didn't realize the benefits of owning my own company until I did this, and so that's what drives my fuel. I want you to do the same thing. Quit making 30% production or 30% on your net production. Take ownership into your own hands. Make more money. Be more wealthy. Support the community the way you want to. I would want you all to please follow me. I post a lot of stuff on Instagram. I'm on Facebook Live as we speak. Never did that before. Probably screwed it up, but I try to do that as much as I can to give back to you guys. And then something fun. I just released a podcast where we're in episode 3. 4. Super fun. Rod is actually being released in a week. His firm. But please subscribe to that. We're on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and all that good stuff. But check out that website. It's a lot of fun. It's specifically about startups right now, if you were thinking about doing a startup. But next season will be about acquisitions. So it'll be called Acquisitions Uncensored. So that'll be fun. Okay, cool. I definitely see some questions here. I'm going to review those questions, but I want to turn it over to Mr. Tyler next. If you're ready, my friend, are you good or yeah?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, so I'm gonna hand this off. Make host. You're up. You're up, pal.
Okay, I always do this wrong.
This is yes.
Did it work?
Nice, buddy. Thank you.
All right, only took month 10 of COVID for me to learn how to do this. So. Okay, everyone. Well, my name is Tyler Jones. I'm an attorney here in the Pacific Northwest. I work with dentists all over the country. I'm licensed in Alaska, Oregon, Washington. I work with dentists on all their business needs, whether that's associate employment agreements, getting out of them, negotiating them. I work a lot with buying and selling practices, dental partnerships, forming them and separating, real estate associated with healthcare and dental, human resources and employment law with dentists. So pretty much anything involving your professional career, that's kind of what I've hitched my wagon to in my own practice. And I just really enjoy working with dentists. People ask me why I do it, and I say I was a tax attorney by training. I went and got an extra degree in tax law, and after I graduated, I would get brought in a lot to advise on some of the tax consequences of these dental practice transitions. And after a year of doing that, I got really bored of getting brought in the 9th inning, so I decided to start doing them, and it's just been a great part of my practice. And I always say working with dentists is the best, because you guys are really the last ones that hang your own shingle, and you're the last healthcare providers that run your own business. And so working with you guys is just such a treat. Let's see here. So I have a lot to talk about, and I could talk about this all day because I'm so passionate about it. But, usually when I'm representing a buyer, which is most of my practice, I prefer representing buyers, I think this slide is really important, because oftentimes I'm the first attorney that some of my clients have ever spoken to. And a lot of times people don't know, how do how do I work with an attorney? I don't even know what questions I should be asking you. And so I figured I'd share some things that I think that when I see clients who come to me and they say, Tyler, I've been working with this attorney, it's not working out. I got your name from someone. Can you help me? I'll share some things that, maybe weren't working for them. And you can learn a little bit more about how to effectively use an attorney. So the first thing you should know is whenever you engage an attorney for a dental practice transition, that attorney should send you an engagement letter. It's not long. They're usually a couple pages, and they just kind of spell out what the attorney's going to do for you, how much they're going to charge, how they're going to charge you, when they're going to bill you, and all that stuff. It's not overly complicated. It's usually just a letter that you sign at the back, but you really want to establish the scope of the attorney's work that they're going to do for you. In most dental practice acquisitions, it's usually twofold, maybe three, is making your business entity for you, helping you negotiate and purchase the practice, and then whatever you're doing on the real estate. And we'll talk about that, the real estate associated with the practice. Some of the biggest mistakes I see with people who engage another attorney and then up coming to me at kind of the 11th hour is, they don't have an engagement letter. So they got sent a bill, maybe halfway through the process that really surprised them. They didn't get a good fee estimate. We'll talk more about that and what a good fee is for an attorney, and timing. It's really important to ask your attorney, hey, do you have time for this? Attorneys are a lot like dentists, where we don't turn away new patients. We don't turn away new clients that easily. But it's really important for you to feel comfortable that, if I email my attorney or if I need to get a hold of him or her, that they're going to be available. The number one mistake I think I see a lot of people make is that they don't really understand how to effectively use an attorney. Sometimes people think, well, I want Tyler to go in there and get me the very best deal possible. And that's a good strategy. And I have some clients who want to do that. And that's a great, I'm happy to do that. But other times it's okay to tell your attorney, hey, I'm going to have my CPA look at the numbers. You don't need to do that. Attorneys really shouldn't be blessing the finances of a transaction. I'm happy to share with you, what I see in the market, what I see a lot of people doing. But ultimately, the decision on whether a practice is worth what the seller is asking, that's a question for your practice consultant like Mr. Dinsio. And so you really want to understand what you're asking people to do. And that's a big part of the team aspect of buying these practices. The other thing is you need to understand who you're talking to, right? I think Michael will tell you that he has a tendency to see a ton of opportunity in a lot of these practices. And I think Rod would say that a lot of these practices have a ton of opportunity to really make a lot more money for you than maybe even what the seller was making. Attorneys, we see that, but we're really risk adverse people. You're hiring us to discuss with you the legal aspects of buying the practice. And so our concerns are usually kind of centered on, is the deal memorialized in a way that you're happy with? Is this what you want? And that, do you understand the risks, the pros and cons of what the way the transaction was structured? So I always encourage whenever, I hear these horror stories of, well, my attorney said the practice was overvalued. That should be a red flag for you. Barring something exceptional, most attorneys really shouldn't be stepping into that field. I'm sure Mike has seen some of those around the country where attorneys kind of get over their skis. So you really want to understand the role your attorney has and understand that. The third thing, and I can't stress this enough, is hire a dental specific attorney. Unlike some of the other professions, an attorney who specializes in something, it usually makes the cost cheaper, right? Someone else paid me to learn and read the HIPAA regulations. Someone else paid me to understand exactly how Dentrix books accounts receivable. So when we're looking at reports together. And so by doing that, it should bring the cost down. And so it's so important to use a dental specific attorney in these transactions. So even if you don't like me, I have a list of ones around the country that I work with all the time that are great. And I'm happy to share that with you, especially if you want someone who's local. It just makes for a much smoother transition, I think. And I think Rod may share with you in his presentation, the worst thing you could do is hire your friend from the country club or your brother-in-law who is a divorce attorney, because you're just going to get a surprise bill because the attorney's probably billing you by the hour, and you don't want to pay them to learn how dentistry works. You want to hire someone who already knows how these practice transitions are supposed to go. Rod, did I cover that? I didn't want to step on your toes there. So
No, you're good. All good.
So the legal components in buying a dental practice, there's a lot, and dentists, I love you guys, but you're type A people. You love lists. 77 checkpoint list for buying a dental practice, 145 checkpoint list for buying a dental practice. I get it. The lists are really helpful. I think the problem oftentimes in buying these is we tend to think of them as a list of things to do, and it's really more of a constellation of tasks that have to happen before you can buy. So there isn't one thing you do before the next. Usually it's just a bunch of stuff that you're working on all at the same time to make sure that it's ready by the time you close. That being said, there is some things that you could put in list format, which I've tried to do here. So the first step in usually buying a practice is a letter of intent. If you're working with a great broker who's brokering the practice that's for sale, like Rod at Omni, most of them have a letter of intent that is usually very good, if not totally fine. I think they've had attorneys look at it before, and you should rely on their ask them for the letter of intent. Don't feel like you have to go on LegalZoom and get it. Most of the brokers have one that they would prefer you start with. And it's okay to tweak it and make sure it fits what you want, but most of the brokers have one, and that's usually the first opportunity I get working with buyers on these practices. Some things to look at in the letter of intent that are really important is it binding or non-binding? Under most state laws, most letters of intent are non-binding. Occasionally you'll have some more predatory sellers, especially in other parts of the country, not here on the West Coast, but there's some brokers out there who will try and make certain parts of the letter of intent binding, must pay $50,000 if you don't pull the ripcord by now. Gently turning letters of intent into promissory notes that you promise to pay this amount. So you do want to make sure that it's non-binding. Usually the only part of a letter of intent that is binding is that once you sign it, you agree not to look for other practices to purchase until you decide you don't want to purchase this one, and the seller agrees not to actively solicit other potential purchasers of their practice. So I always say it's the prom clause. You've decided you're going to go to prom together, and you can't look for a different date until you both agree to break up. Some things to think about is earnest money. People always, a lot of times when sellers aren't using a broker, they'll want earnest money. That's usually because they've been reading too many blog articles online. It's pretty rare to have earnest money on a dental practice transition. There are some cases where it's necessary, but more often than not, it's in the best interest of the practice transition for you to not give earnest money. Mike can talk more about it or more eloquently about it than I can, but you want as much cash in your checking account as possible for underwriting for the bank. So you putting down earnest money only serves to hurt that. After the letter of intent is signed, usually that's when you make your business entity. In most states, you're making an LLC. Some states call them a professional limited liability company. I'd say about 99% of private buyers, just a doctor who wants to buy their first practice, are going to use an LLC. For some instances, we'll set up a professional service corporation. And usually the number one question I get is, I want to be an S Corp, Tyler, make me an S Corp. And the thing I would always say is there is no such thing as an S Corporation. You're either an LLC or a corporation, and then your CPA will make an election for you to be taxed like an S Corporation if that is in your best interest. So more often than not, 99% of the time, you're an LLC of some kind. And then, I'm happy to answer questions during the Q&A. We could talk about when an S election makes the most sense for you, but usually your CPA will coach you through that. The third step, and we'll talk more about this, is due diligence. So you kicking the tires on the practice, and I'll give you some legal things to consider. Mike can talk to you all day about some of the more clinical and on the ground stuff to look at. The purchase and sale agreement, sometimes they're called asset purchase agreements or APAs. Those are the agreements that you use to buy the practice, the assets of the practice. Then there's the agreements that relate to the real estate, a lease or a lease assignment, or maybe you're buying the real estate when you're buying the practice. And then sometimes there's an employment agreement. Maybe you need the seller to work back some, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. So some common due diligence items that can cause issues for buyers. Mike spent a ton of time talking about it, and he's spot on. Accounts receivable are usually a big question mark. You can tell if the accounts receivable are a good buy from you if you're working with someone like Mike or someone on your team just by looking at an aging AR report. If a practice has a ton of ARs that are over 90 days, that's usually a barometer that there's something wrong in the practice. And although you probably won't buy those ARs, it's usually, like I said, an indicator that maybe some other things are going on. In most practice transitions, you're buying the accounts receivable that are 0 to 90 days. The hope would be anything less than 30 has a high degree of collectability. So you really want to wrap your head around that. Credit balances, Mike talked a lot about those. Those, in my experience, are usually the number one cause of litigation after these practices close. So you really want to make sure you understand the credit balances, the rules associated with credit balances in your state. You want to look at the schedule, see if they're continuing during the due diligence process to continue to do recall, booking out procedures for you to do, that they haven't, stopped scheduling people because they found a buyer. Financial inconsistencies, so tying in their profit and loss statements to their practice managers reports and their tax returns. Mike can work with you on that. A big one is if you're buying a practice, a lot of COVID-19 was hard on a lot of people, and I think the people in the industry who suffered the most are multi-practice owners. And so a lot of multi-practice owners are selling their second practice, and that means that the owner probably wasn't actively involved in that practice. They had an associate working it. And so when you buy, if you're not taking a nuanced look at it, the standard practice purchase and sale agreement would just say, well, the owner agrees not to compete with me. Well, that doesn't do you much good if this owner never really practiced there and it was an associate dentist who's no longer going to work there after you buy it. So you really want to wrap your head around if there's been any employees working in the practice that may have covenants not to compete that can be assigned to you. Regulatory compliance, that's always a question, and you guys are so well trained in it in dental school that you have a really great idea about HIPAA, and you know a lot. Off the top of my head, probably this year, the big one that's been the biggest gotcha is Windows 10. Any practice that's using something older than Windows 10, that software is no longer HIPAA compliant. I remember when that regulation came out in January, I kind of just glazed over it. I just was like, how could you, if you're using something older than Windows 10, that means like Windows XP. And I just never thought it would be an issue. And it comes up a handful of times already. And you really want to wrap your head around what those costs will be, how soon after, if you're going to buy it and then upgrade it yourself, how soon are you going to hang out there? How long are you going to be able to hang out there without a HIPAA compliant computer system? So talk to your attorney about that. I'll skip that terminating employment one for the end. Common legal issues are just inabilities to honor the LOI. Something comes up in your life or financing's taking longer, and so you set a closing date on your LOI that you can't fulfill. That's a big red flag for sellers, so you really want to manage that. Analysis paralysis, and this is such a big one, and it's a big problem for buyers, and it's so important to have a team around you to help you through this. But you guys are so smart, and you've worked so hard clinically for your degrees and your professional status and in your skills and your training. And what happens when you go to buy this practice is all those tools that you developed in dental school, they can start underservicing you, because you sit there and you go, well, I want to understand everything about this dental practice before I buy it. I want to know every single thing about it. And it can slow the transition down. At some point you just need to make some decisions and move forward with the understanding that you are going to make mistakes and that you can usually fix those on the end. The story I always tell is I had a dentist who was buying a practice, and he was just razor blading through every expense that the seller had in their practice. And he came to me, he goes, I want to show you my spreadsheets I made. He goes, well, the seller, he's overpaying for his phone by $18 a month. And he showed me the spreadsheet he made, and he had called 25 different phone providers or Google Voice to get comps on the service. And so I think he had like 24 of those. And then he had said, and he's overpaying by his insurance by $110 a year. And he showed me that he had gotten 44 quotes for different insurance companies. He wasn't sure which one to buy. And I totally respect the hustle, and I'm the same way. And I certainly don't fault you for it, but that attention to detail can sometimes underserve people during the due diligence process, because time kills deals. And a lot of that stuff you can tweak and massage after you close, and you're burning bandwidth and calories on, $10 and $20 issues when maybe there are thousands and thousands of dollar issues that need to be resolved sooner. Other due diligence issues that come up a lot, PPO versus fee for service. Delta Premier is going away. They won't put this in writing, and you usually have to call and beg and ask for it to speak to a few people's managers. But if you're looking at a Delta Premier practice, you want full and adequate assurances from Delta that you're going to be able to inherit that preferential fee schedule. A lot of times people say, well, I want to negotiate a higher fee, or I'm going to take the practice out of network as soon as I buy it. Mike can tell you about the pros and cons of that. I'm not a huge fan of doing it right away. The other one is fee for service. I get a lot of people who are super excited about buying fee for service practice. They feel like they found a golden ticket. Oftentimes what makes a fee for service practice good is that the seller practices really conservative dentistry. My clients will go in, they'll do a chart audit, and they'll just see a ton of watches and on the charts, and they'll get really excited. They'll go, well, I can go in here and, upgrade some of these procedures, start doing different treatment planning. And usually the culture that goes on with a fee for service usually doesn't lend itself well to treating a lot of all at once. And so a lot of my clients who buy fee for service practice say, I thought I was going to come in and really make some money here, but a lot of my patients, when I start treatment planning what they need, they cringe. They're used to just getting a couple $100 a bill every time for their hygiene. And Mike, do you see that? I see that all the time. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So deal fatigue, we talked about that. Deal fatigue. If anyone's ever bought a house and it's taken a long time, deal fatigue is that feeling the day before you buy the house when someone wants you to sign one more thing, or you need to wire a little bit more money to the escrow account. And you just say, I don't even want this house anymore. It's just too much work. Deal fatigue is that feeling you get when you're buying a dental practice where you've been talking to your attorney every couple days, emailing them nonstop. You're getting 50 emails every time you go in for a cup of coffee. It's just very busy. And it's that feeling of, I don't even want this. Why am I doing this? And in conquering that during the due diligence phase is really important. And the best way I say to conquer that is farm it out. Who's your quarterback? Is it Michael? Is he helping you buy the practice? Are you relying on Rod to get you some information? You can't do it yourself, so you need people around you to kind of help carry the bucket up the hill. Ortho contracts are a big one in due diligence, and I don't mean for orthodontists. I don't think we have any orthodontists in the crowd. Obviously, those are part of an ortho practice, but Invisalign contracts are a big part of these transitions lately. Oftentimes the seller took, the $5,000 for the Invisalign up front, and maybe they did 2 or 3 phases of it, but there's another year of Invisalign left after closing. You really want to make sure that one, you can do Invisalign when you buy it, or you've made arrangements to do the clear aligner treatment, whatever company you're using. And 2, you understand, hey, how much work am I really obligated to finish for you? Are you going to come in and finish this? You got the money. Why do I have to finish it? So ortho contracts have been a bit of a big deal the last year or so. The other one are hygiene and rewards programs. They're a great marketing thing. I don't know too much about them. Michael probably knows more than I do, but a lot of times people are setting up programs, hey, for $200 a year, you get 2 hygiene appointments and free x-ray, and we give you a little punch card with some, other benefits. And people enroll in these programs. And by after a few years of doing it, there's a few hundred people in there who have this expectation of hey, I'm going to get this discounted treatment when I go in to see Dr. So-and-so. And when the buyer buys the practice, you don't want your first interaction with them to be, hey, I don't do that program you paid for. I'm new. And so you want to really understand, does the program exist? How does it work? Am I comfortable stepping into it? Does the seller need to kick me a little bit of money so I can finish the obligations that they agreed to start? Very similar to the ortho contracts, but those have been creeping up more and more, especially in Washington, as some insurance law changes were made last year. This slide is the slide I use to scare people into hiring an attorney. It's actually not as bad as it looks. So I'll just go through really quickly, and then I know I'm running out of time. These are some of the agreements that are common in a dental practice purchase and sale agreement. You have the purchase and sale agreement. You'll have the non-compete agreement, where the seller agrees not to compete with you, or you make the seller's associate agree not to compete with you, or both. Some of the miscellaneous documents are, the assignment of accounts receivable. You'll need that to cash the seller's checks if you're buying the accounts receivable, a bill of sale, and a closing certificate. On the purchase and sale agreement, some things that buyers need to spend the most time on: allocation schedules. So how are you going to be taxed when you buy all the assets of this practice? 99% of dental practice acquisitions are asset sales, where you're going to make your PLLC, your entity, an empty bucket. You're going to buy all the stuff out of the seller's entity, and you're going to start fresh. So you have to have an allocation schedule. Representations and warranties, those are promises the sellers are making to you about the practice and what's going on in the practice. What contracts you want to assume. Number one bad contract: yellow pages. You don't need a yellow pages contract. Don't assume it. Don't buy it. Don't even look at it. I had a guy, he said, I'll assume the yellow pages contract. It's no big deal. And I emailed the broker. I go, hey, can you send me the yellow pages contract? Seller was paying $40,000 a year for yellow pages.
When was Tyler, when was the last time that actually happened?
Literally like 6 months ago.
Oh.
They're in there. You don't want them. I get myself in trouble sometimes, but men of a certain age love yellow pages. It's just they love that stuff, so you just gotta watch it. Prior work, you really want to understand, hey, if someone comes in and they broke a crown, a crown fell off, how are we going to handle that? I can't bill insurance for it. It was too recent. Is the seller going to come in and fix it? Are you, the buyer, going to do it? Charge the seller some money. You want the rules for that clearly spelled out, because it'll happen. People always seem to eat caramel apples the month after someone buys a practice, so it'll happen. Credit balances, we talked about that. Seriously, probably the number one cause of litigation after these close. So you really want to be careful. Real estate issues. Mike, do I have time?
Yeah, you're good.
All right. So real estate issues is, this is probably where your attorney earns their money the most, especially if they're dental specific. This is where I spend most of my time, especially if you're working on a good transition where everyone's got a good dental team around them. Most buyers come into these saying, I want a whole new lease. I want to renegotiate the lease. I want tenant improvements and rent abatement. And I was on the dark web, in the deep web of dental town blogs, and I heard that in Omaha, Nebraska, Dr. Kyle Johnson got $16 a square foot and 23 months of rent abatement when he bought his dental practice. And I want that. And, and you really need to understand exactly where you are in the marketplace and where you're at regionally to understand, what a good opportunity is for a new lease and what those terms look like. The nice part about a new lease is you get a fresh start. Usually you can negotiate some rent abatement, some TIs. The downsides of a new lease are usually that, one, you don't have time to negotiate a new lease. You signed an LOI, you're closing in 60 days. That's not enough time to negotiate something particularly meaningful or, majorly different than what the seller already has in place. The landlords know that you want to buy the practice, so you have almost zero bargaining power because they know that you already want the thing. So it's not like you're going to walk. So for every 20 or, for every 100 dental practice transitions I do, probably 75% of them are a lease assignment as opposed to a whole new lease. A lease assignment, that's you stepping into the shoes of the seller. So they were the tenant under the lease, and now you're going to become the tenant. Some issues that are associated with that is, under most state law, the seller will remain responsible under the lease unless the parties agree otherwise. So unless this landlord says the seller's off the hook, the seller stays on the hook. That doesn't really affect you, the buyers, all that much, but it can have a chilling effect on the seller wanting to move forward with the transition. I'm sure Rod has a couple of horror stories where a seller just wouldn't do it, couldn't handle not being on the lease. So you as a buyer, it's in your best interest to negotiate to try and get the seller off the hook as soon as possible when you're doing a new lease assignment, because it just helps everyone make it a smoother transition. In that spirit, since you're stepping into the shoes of the lease, technically under most state law, you would be responsible for anything the seller did before you bought, before you took the lease assignment, unless the lease assignment says otherwise. So this came up recently, is there was a dental practice transition I did, and we were doing a lease assignment, and I asked the landlord, I go, well, landlord, has there been any breaches by the tenant? He goes, no breaches, but he hasn't paid me rent in 9 months. Because under Governor Inslee's proclamation, you can't be evicted. So he just won't pay his rent, and he knows I can't evict him, and he says he'll pay me when Governor Inslee's proclamation is over. And so, that was a huge pitfall, because if we had just done the lease assignment, then in addition to him owing the landlord $90,000, the new dentist I was representing, she would have owed the landlord $90,000 too. So you really want to put in the lease assignment some clear demarcation of, hey, new buyers only responsible for stuff that happens after the closing. Some pitfalls when you're looking at a lease assignment is, one, you want to make sure that there's 10 years on the lease. Most banks are going to require that. You can get there any number of ways. You could have a 5-year lease with a 5-year option to extend. You could have, 5 2-year options to extend, however you want to get there. You want to negotiate a favorable assignment clause. So, it's never too early to start planning for your retirement. So you want to negotiate a situation where you can favorably assign the lease to someone who purchases your practice. You want to avoid, especially if you're in the Portland, Vancouver, Seattle, or Anchorage areas, demolition and recapture clauses that say, hey, at certain points, the landlord can come in and kick you out, move you, and you have to just get up and go. Those are really common, especially in more urban areas. You want to avoid those. If you are looking for a whole new lease, you want to start as early as possible. The last thing I'll talk a little bit about is purchasing real estate at the time of closing. It's hard to do. Most people just can't afford it. So what you can do is you can put in the lease you sign, hey, in a year or 2 years when a bank will give me a loan, I can buy the practice. I can buy the real estate from the landlord, and we'll pre-agree on what the price will be, and you can force them to sell. That's great if you can get a landlord to agree to it. At a minimum, you should have a right of first refusal in the lease, so that if the landlord ever wants to sell to someone else, they have to offer it to you first. If you are able to purchase the lease, a really great way to do it is, if you can't afford the down payment for the real estate, is just do a promissory note for that amount between you and the seller. So if the real estate's $1 million, you get a loan from your banker for $800,000, and then the seller gives you a loan for $200,000 to cover the down payment, and you just structure the terms so that you're basically paying two people, but you can accomplish buying the real estate concurrently with buying the practice. Timing is everything. If you want to buy the real estate, you usually need a little bit more lead time. A rushed dental practice transition takes 30 days. 60 days is really comfortable. With a real estate one, you're definitely going to need every one of those 60 days. So last thing I'll talk about is some COVID-19 issues that have arisen since COVID-19, and some things to think about from a legal perspective as you buy a practice in sort of these murkier waters. The first one is human resources. What I learned during COVID-19 is that dentists are not the best human resources managers. And so you really want to wrap your head as a buyer of, hey, what are these people expecting from me if I buy this practice? A common issue has been when COVID-19 happened, a lot of dentists, in an act of great generosity, paid out all their employees' vacation and PTO and sick time. So the dental hygienist got paid out for all 5 weeks of sick or PTO, and that's great. But a lot of the hygienists haven't reconciled the fact that that means that, yeah, although you may still take that trip or that vacation you wanted, you've already been paid for that. And so you want to make sure you understand exactly what these employees are expecting so that you don't buy a practice and someone comes up to you and goes, hey, I had 3 weeks off and it was supposed to be paid, and you don't know if it was paid out by the seller during COVID-19. You don't know if it's been accruing since you took over. So you really want to understand those unpaid benefits. And most importantly, so that you know, is what should happen when you buy your practice is that the seller should pay out the employees for all their accrued PTO and benefits. And you should make sure that happens so that you're not responsible for paying out employees vacation, PTO, and paid sick time. And those distinctions we can talk about if we work together about how those interlay on top of each other. But you don't want to have to pay for that. Mike has a good horror story. I'm sure he'll tell about that. The other one is Family First Coronavirus Relief Act leave. That was the bill that was passed in March that gave some employers some ability to receive tax credits if they pay out leave for employees who are impacted by COVID-19. You're going to want to know if some of that was taken. You're also just going to want to generally know if they've had any COVID-19 outbreaks, what their procedures are, how they're managing COVID-19. Is it something you're comfortable with? Have they been phoning it in? Or if you walk in, are there 9 people in the waiting room, or is everyone still getting a temperature check at the door? So you really want to understand that. Leases, a lot of people are asking for force majeure clauses in their leases because if there's another shutdown, they're concerned about having to pay rent. Those are great if you can get it. Most force majeure clauses historically prohibit the landlord during a pandemic or act of God from kicking you out of the space. They don't stop the landlord from you owing them rent. And so if you do get a force majeure clause, make sure it's one that gives you some relief on rent in the event of any act of God or pandemic or anything like that. And force majeure is French for act of God. I'm not just making that up. Debt issues. So a lot of sellers have PPP loans. You want to make sure that those are handled in the closing so you're not left holding the bag. I'll tease it for you. It's pretty much impossible for a purchaser to get left holding the bag, despite what most of the bankers will tell you. So you don't need to be too concerned. Rod's nodding. Much to do about nothing. You just need to make sure you got your arms around it, that you understand what's going to happen with it, and it's no big deal, but you need to work through it. EIDL loans or SBA loans that were given as part of coronavirus relief, those are usually secured loans that have low interest rates, and most sellers forgot that there is actually security interest on the business with those, so those do need to get paid off at closing. Some other due diligence items to think about: employee wages. A lot of people got shook down by their hygienists when they during the shutdown. The hygienist said, I won't come back unless I get a $5 raise. You want to really understand the employee wages that you're going to be inheriting, because it's hard to walk those back. You don't want your first day with the employees to be, hey, I need to cut you back down to market wages. Scheduling, like I said, make sure they're still scheduling, they're doing recall, see what the schedule looks like. Installment plans, a lot of people, when they were hurting for money, were allowing patients to do some pretty big procedures on installment plans. So you want to understand if there are any of those. The last thing I'll say is just, it's a little tougher to buy a practice during COVID-19, but it isn't worse, because all the things you're doing when you're buying a practice during COVID-19, all the extra questions and steps you have to go through, those are the kind of good questions that you probably should have been asking even if there wasn't a COVID-19 outbreak. And I think a lot of the extra steps that we go through since COVID-19 are probably here to stay, because they're just good best practices. So I think COVID-19 in a weird way has been kind of an accelerant for how we do these dental practice transitions. And, maybe we were trending to some of these due diligence items in the next 5 or 10 years. And I think it kind of accelerated us to having maybe a more ratcheted up concern about some of these issues sooner. So I tend to think of COVID-19 as an accelerant to buying these practices as opposed to like a barrier to entry. But Mike and Rod may disagree. So that's all I got. If anyone ever has any questions, feel free to reach out to me, but I'll stop talking.
No, that's perfect, Tyler. I'm actually pretty blown away right now that out of all of that, not one person asked a question. I mean, there's so many goodies there. Like I constantly get questions about all of that stuff, post transaction reworks, and what your liability actually is with all of this stuff. So please, folks, throw your questions in now before you forget them. But Rod, take it away. I do want to tell everybody we're not going till 9. We're going to end this bad boy at 8:30, about an hour from now. We do want to sprinkle in some Q&A, and Rod's presentation is going to be probably high level valuations, and you all should be asking questions about how brokers are getting to the number that they get at. So let's get some questions in. But Rod, do I need to give you access, or did Tyler give it to you?
You need to give it to me, I think.
Okay. Let's see here. Oh, Tyler, you're still the host.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. I know you like to be in control always.
I don't. Where is this host button?
Go to participants, then panelists, and then hover over Rod. Click more. Should be in there.
Oh, cool. Sorry, guys. There you go, Rod.
I know you get legal assistance to help with these kinds of things.
Yeah.
Joking. All right, Rod, you're up, buddy. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Let's see, can you see the slides there?
Yep, you're good.
All right, cool. Okay, well, thanks, you guys. It's very informative, and it'll actually make my presentation go a lot smoother as we'll integrate a lot of things into this. So I'm Rod Johnston. I'm with Omni Practice Group. I started Omni about 15 years ago or so. My background's accounting and finance. Just kind of fell into practice brokering through a friend of mine who was a dentist, and really enjoy it. It fits very well with my background, doing a lot of accounting work, as well as I did some sales back in the day, and working with attorneys quite a bit with SEC reporting and compliance and things like that, putting different programs together. We've probably done over 400 some practices over the last 15 years. Been very active in several markets. Washington's where we started, and now we have brokers in several states. And the thing I'm really proud about Omni is we have a diverse group of brokers here in Washington. We have CPAs, and we have dentists, and we have former dental staff. We have commercial brokers who specialize in doing dental as well. So we've got quite a variety of people who can really be experts in different areas in the field. And we do practice transitions, everything from associate buy-ins to mergers to partnerships, consolidations, just a variety of different types of transitions, and there's more than one. We do valuations. We're accredited business appraisers. We've gone through the training courses and the tests and all that stuff to actually do valuations very well. And we go to the practice valuation study group every year. They have a big convention. It's usually somewhere across the United States, and it's a whole bunch of practice brokers talking for 2 days about valuations. So talking about, watching paint dry, that's about as exciting as that. So, and we also do real estate, specializing. Most of our business is in dental, so we do a lot of startups, negotiate leases, do help doctors buy and sell property as well. So one of the areas I like to start out is kind of the mindset of the sellers. So something to keep in mind while you're looking at practices. You're not just buying a widget from a seller. You're actually buying their baby. They're some of them built this practice from scratch over 20, 30 years. Some of them have been there 40 years, and I've seen a few that have been there 50 years. Their staff have been with them for a long time. Their patients are their best friends. They hang out with them all the time. It's really like the proverbial man shed to some of these doctors. It's the place they go to hang out, and they love being dentists. They love everyone. So keep that in mind as you're buying a practice. You're not just buying a tool or something. It's actually an emotional part to these sellers. They they're really attached to it. So I actually purposefully try not to let sellers and buyers talk to each other too much initially, because I've had a few buyers who go into a practice and just start saying not so nice things about the chairs, and the front desk is doing a horrible job. What's wrong with the AR? And the front desk has been with them for 40 years, and you don't know the backstory about that front desk person. Maybe they're going through health problems. So just think about those things when you're looking at practices, because you can get shut out of a practice really quick if the seller doesn't really like what you're saying. So, and they don't know who you are. So you got to get to know them a little bit. And that happens kind of after the letter of intent and due diligence phase happens. And like I said, the staff and the patients have been there forever, and they're an emotional part of it. So think about those things, and they're going through a lot when they're deciding to sell a practice as well, because it's a slow dance from a broker standpoint. We'll meet with these sellers, 1 year, and it might take them 2, 3, 4, 5 years before they actually decide to pull the trigger. And it's not that they really don't want to sell or they can't sell. They can. They have the money. They have the funds to do it. It's just hard for a lot of them. They just, some of them think that if they sell their practice, they're not a dentist anymore. So it's really an emotional thing for a lot of sellers. COVID, I know both Tyler and Mike have talked about this. The COVID effect, I called it, on patients. It has had some effect as far as how they approach the practice. They get tested before they go in and those types of things. But for the most part, the sellers that we talk to, we're seeing most of them come back into the offices. We're now approaching the second cycle of hygiene in offices. So there have been some practices who might be down a little bit because all these patients were waiting to get their cleanings done. And now they got that first round done, and they might, with the increase in COVID right now, the number of cases, they might be a little more hesitant right now. But for the most part, we're seeing a lot of them come in. And you have to be careful about reading into statistics and numbers and what the news channels are telling you as far as practices and patients going back. Because I've seen some national statistics that say that 50% of the practices practices are down about 50% from patients, and that's on a national scale. So if you look at New York, they're probably down 75% because they're just they're a mess right now. But if you look at on a local level in Washington, practices we talk to, that the majority of them are back quite a bit, 80, 85, 90, and even above 100% in some cases. So effect on front desk and dental assistants as far as them coming back, they have had to take the extra steps to comply with the new regulations from the ADA and some suggestions and as far as sterilization and taking temperature of patients coming in. So they have had to take a few more steps, but as far as getting back into the practice, they're all coming back. And I think everybody's heard or talked about the horror stories of hygienists going on right now. There is a shortage of hygienists. Hygienists, while they were out on leave from COVID or furlough, not a lot of them, but some of them found out that they really liked being away from the practice, and maybe their husband or their wife now they figured out that they can afford to not work, so they haven't. So that even creates even a bigger shortage for hygienists. And I just talked to someone today who said they made an offer to a hygienist for $65 an hour as a hygienist. So you thought Tyler's fees were high, but not as high as some of these hygienists. So just kidding, Tyler. Practice operations. We talked about that a little bit. They are operating a little bit differently now than pre-COVID due to all the regulations and things going on as far as the number of patients you can have in the operatories and in the office and in the waiting rooms, and taking temperatures and having to clean each room between patients thoroughly. Not that you didn't clean rooms in the past between patients, but it's much more thorough now. So those types of things are affecting it. The big question on valuations, it has had some effect in certain areas. I'm the president of the National Association of Practice Brokers, so I talk to brokers all over the United States. And I was talking to the broker in New York, and he says in New York, they've basically knocked off about 30% of the values back there because of COVID and patients really not coming back the way they have here. So, but here locally, I would say we haven't really had a big impact on valuations. We're treating 2020, taking out the 3 or 4 months of COVID and smoothing out the year as if it didn't happen. And the banks have been working with that, and they've been okay with that. There might be some practices that might not have come back all the way, and we might take a little bit of a haircut on those practices. But for the most part, there hasn't been a huge effect on valuations. So, and the effect on sellers, we have recently getting more calls from sellers telling us they're ready to come out. They're ramping up and speeding up their retirement and getting out of practice ownership. They don't want to have to deal with this anymore, and I think COVID maybe gave them some time off to think about their careers, their lifestyle, and just life in general. So they're saying, okay, I was going to wait 3 years, now I'm done. So let's go ahead and put my practice on the market. Tyler talked about PPP loans and all the other things with that, so I won't really get into that here. So what's the average practice out there look like? Our typical practice is doing about $650,000 in collected production. Of course, there's larger ones and there's smaller ones. Overhead's usually around 67% for our practices that we have. The national average is, I think, about 65%. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. Collections rate, 91%, 3 days of hygiene, 1 front desk, 2 assistants, and a hygienist is pretty standard. Average age for our dentists is about 64 when they're retiring, and they're seeing about 10 to 15 new patients per month. So that's our typical practice that we usually have to sell. A lot of buyers call us and they're looking for the $800 to $1 million practice with the 50% overhead and 25 new patients a month and the unicorn, but those don't come around as much. The ideal practice is doing about 65% overhead, getting about 25 new patients per month. If you're looking for an ideal practice, you want to get as close to 30% of the patients on recall as possible. You want to have 1,500 to maybe 2,000 active patients. You want to see upward trend in the growth of 10 to 15%. Banks really love that. They start questioning things when they see practices that are going down by 10 to 20% per year. They wonder what's going on. Why is the practice losing revenue? It's been remodeled within the last 7 years. You have digital in the practice. It doesn't have to be a major remodel, but at least it's been new carpet, new paint. It's been updated to some degree. The seller's willing to stay on for a period of time to work back. Some buyers ask the sellers to stay on for as long as possible. There's really typically not a need. We often find that the sellers will stay on and work, and then after 2 or 3 weeks, the buyer is wondering why the seller is there, because they're really not doing a whole lot, and the buyer's doing all the work, and they found that they can take on the management and those types of things. So they just go ahead and agree to part ways after a period of time. And 4 operatories at least minimum, with room to grow. Which brings up a point. Oftentimes we get buyers that want 7 or 8 ops, and we ask them why, and they pretty much give a answer of, well, that's what I saw in Dentaltown, or that's what I saw that I need to from a book I read. And I've seen practices do 1.6 million or more in 4 operatories. So you can do a lot of production in 4 operatories. So just remember, when you get more operatories, that means you pay more rent. So, and rent's expensive in especially King County area. So staff production, you want to see $20,000 to $25,000 of revenue per month out of your staff in the practice. And these are just some benchmarks that I'm happy to send over to you. I don't think we need to really go through these, but I think most people have seen these. So just some of the points to highlight: the staff compensation should be around 25% of total collections, and your facilities and rent should be 7 to 9%. Your dental supplies, I've actually seen that go down over the years. It's 6% of total collections. So just some things to keep an eye on when you're looking at practices. It doesn't mean that if a practice doesn't have these things that you don't buy it, but these are some targets and some things to kind of take a look at. Like the title says, they're benchmarks to measure against other practices. Now getting into price here and valuations. So I better take a drink. So it's water, by the way. So rules of thumb are to be used cautiously. I get people all the time quoting, it's like, well, practice should be selling for 100% of collections. I'm like, there's a lot of variables to that, and we rarely sell practices for 100% of collections or 80% in certain areas. So it just kind of depends. So Mike kind of hit on this a little bit. So which is a better deal? A practice producing $1 million with a price of $700,000, or a practice producing $800,000 with the price of $700,000. Well, the $1 million practice has an overhead of 85%, and they're only taking home $150,000. And the $800,000 practice has a 50% overhead, and they're taking home $400,000. So the $800,000 is actually practice is a better deal, because you're taking home a lot more money, and cash flow is king in this game. So that's the thing to really focus on. Now I'm going to walk through fairly quickly here. So it's just kind of a fairly simple example of evaluation. The values are determined by the attributes of the practice, the collections, adjusted net income, the assets. We do what's called add backs when we're doing valuations. So we start with the tax returns, and we back out any non-operating expenses in the practice. So that's the amortization, the owner's salary, depreciation, travel, all the different things that are really not operational to a practice. And that gives you the adjusted net income. And then we also do a book value on the equipment based on a depreciation schedule we get from the tax return. And we use 3 different methods to come up with our valuation. We have an asset accumulation method, which is the book value of the assets plus a value for goodwill. And then we do a production acquisition method, which is basically historic sales. And a key point to that is we keep track of practices that we sell. We have a database, a customer relationship management system that we track all of the sales. So, we've sold probably 7 to 10 practices in Federal Way, so we can tell you what the historical sales have been in Federal Way as a percentage of collections. And the third method is a capitalization method, and that's what a lot of commercial brokers use to value buildings. And we also use that to value practices as well. It's more or less kind of an investor approach to valuing a practice. If you were to invest in a practice, you would want this type of return from that investment. So then we blend all three together to get a final price. So this is the simple example here. So we have a practice collecting $500,000 a year. They have $450,000 in expenses, and that's before the add backs. And then we have an owner taking a salary of $100,000. He's traveling quite a bit, $50,000 in travel for his continuing education classes in the Bahamas and Europe and wherever else he goes. And then dues and subscription of $20,000 and an asset book value of $300,000. So if you look here, this first adjusted net income column is where we do the add backs. So we start with the collections amount of $500,000 minus the expenses of $450, gives us a net income of $50,000, and that's what we'll see on the tax return. And then we start adding back the non-operational thing. The owners pay $50,000, the travel $50,000, dues and subscriptions $20,000. So that gives us an adjusted net income of $170,000. So the first method we calculate is the asset accumulation method. We start with the asset book value, back out depreciation. That gives us an adjusted book value of $200,000, and at a goodwill value of $170,000, and that's 100% of the adjusted net income number. And that value can be 100% to 200% depending on location and a bunch of other things. So that gives us a valuation using that method of $370,000. So then we go to the next method, which is the production acquisition method. We start with collections of $500,000. We know that historically practices in this market have sold for 70% of collections. So that gives us a production acquisition value of $350,000. And then the third one's the capitalization method. We take the adjusted net income of $170,000. We back out the associate pay. So this is assuming that it's not an owner-run practice. We have to put an associate in there because remember, it's an investment. So we're employing an associate. We're paying $105,000. That gives us an excess earnings of $65,000. We divide that by the capitalization rate, which is typically 20% for most dental practices. And that gives us a capitalization value of $325,000. So we take that and we take a third and blend those values together, a third of each, and that gives us the final value of $348,000. So hopefully.
I fell asleep, Rod. I fell asleep.
Yeah, I was going to say, did we lose a lot of people there? So
one person dropped off. True story.
That's okay.
True.
That's what you wanted me to do, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So next we're going to talk about the cost of delaying the purchase of a practice and why you might overpay for a practice. I used to have a pretty complex calculation in here, which would probably lose even more attendees, but I simplified it. So hold on. So the average practice owner historically makes about 20% more than an associate. So if you own a practice, you will make over your career 20% more than an associate will. So the average associate makes about $175,000 per year. So that's $35,000 per year in opportunity cost you're foregoing by being an associate in a practice and not owning a practice. So if you wait for 10 years and you don't own a practice, that's $350,000 plus interest that you're losing out on over that 10-year period. And that's not including the equity that you're losing out in it as well. So if you buy a practice for say $700,000, you typically can pay that off in 5 to 7 years. So not only are you not getting your $350,000 plus interest over 10 years, you're losing out on the equity in that practice of approximately $700,000. So it's approximately $1 million if you wait for 10 years, $500,000 if you wait for 5 years. So those are some things to consider about. The longer you wait, the more money you're losing out on. So that's the cost of waiting and not buying a practice. So, and reasons to purchase right now, once in a lifetime interest rates. I know Bank of America has like a 1.0% interest rate right now, which is for a short promotion type deal. And there's some other banks out there, typical rates probably, what would you say, Mike, 3.5 to 4?
Yeah, it's high threes right now. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a favorable bank climate. Economy's strong. The longer you wait, the more complicated life gets. As you start to buy a home, you get married, you have kids, and all of a sudden the next thing you know, life happens and you get too busy to own a practice. So that's reason to buy now. And this doesn't exist. We get a lot of people looking for unicorns. They want that 7-op practice with 40% overhead, and staff are paid $10 an hour, and the rent's $1,000 a month, and there's $5 million of untreated treatment in the practice. So those practices that people are looking for that are just they're not out there. So find a nice practice, jump on it. So and just some quick things on different things to look for when you're looking at practice. Active patient count. We get people asking us how many active patients in the practice. Well, Dentrix will tell us one number. We can do a chart count. That's another number, and there's all different kinds of numbers and different ways to come up with that number. But really, you need to, when you do your due diligence, you need to get in there and count them yourself. So don't rely on Dentrix. Don't rely on the doctor. Don't rely on the broker. The broker can work with you to help figure that out, but it really does take some work on your behalf to figure that out. Staff issues. Take a look at your staff overhead in the practice. Doesn't mean it's a bad practice. If the staff overhead is really high, it means you need to fix it. So you need to get in there and work with Mike and figure out how you're going to reduce that staff overhead. And there's two ways to do that. One's to ramp up production. The other way is to lay off some staff or reduce salary. So over under treatment, there's different ways to identify this, and Mike can maybe talk about that at some point. But you can determine if a practice is over treating or under treating by looking at the production, the different procedures they're doing, and different things like that. The age practice, a lot of times the patient's age will match the age of the seller. So if the seller is 70 years old, you're going to see a lot of patients that are going to be elderly, which in some cases, in a lot of cases, it's great because elderly patients pay cash. So it's actually not a bad thing. Legal issues, look at the lease. Tyler talked about this. We won't get into that. Insurance fraud. Be sure and take a look at the seller's Department of Licensing. To see if they have any problems with their licenses, any equipment problems. So let's see, do we have time for our horror stories? We've got a couple minutes. Okay. So don't be this guy. He's a 60-year-old associate that is going to own his own practice someday. He keeps waiting and he hasn't bought one yet. So you don't want to be that person. Deal killers, attorneys, and I'm not talking about Tyler. Tyler does an excellent job. Attorneys are the non-dental people who you need to hire, buyers or sellers who want to hire their Uncle Charlie to act as their attorney. I've seen up to $50,000 attorney bills from their best friend from the country club, and that shouldn't be that high. Not anywhere near that high. Landlords have been deal killers. We had one recently in downtown Seattle where the landlord required the buyer to put down a $50,000 deposit in order to take over the lease assignment. And of course, the buyer walked because the landlord was just totally unreasonable. Consultants, there's bad consultants out there. Mike's not one of them. They'll go in and they'll want to prove their worth. They start slamming the practice. They'll go in and just start ripping things apart and saying, we need to renegotiate this deal. We need to do this, this, and this, when it's a perfectly good practice. And they'll just try to to earn their fee by reducing the price $10,000, $20,000, $50,000. So watch out for those. Time kills all deals. Tyler mentioned that we like to get things done as quick as possible. Couple of different reasons. The confidentiality of the transaction is vitally important. We don't want the staff to find out that the practice is for sale. We don't want the patients to find out the practice is for sale. And if it's a specialty practice, we don't want all the other dentists to find out that the practice is for sale. So the quicker we can get the practice closed, the less likely the chance of word getting out. And there's other reasons too on deals. People lose interest in the practice and things like that. This is just a drop the keys and go. It's a story of a dentist who didn't tell his staff at all. And we were at the closing table and I'd asked him when he's going to tell his staff. And he gave me the keys and said, you can tell him Monday. And he left town. So he just said, I'm out of here. Invisible team, I had a practice that told the staff, I think about a month before they were closing, and the staff all walked. So the entire staff quit. So that can happen. We talked about Uncle Charlie. Give up too quick. As a broker, it's our job to make sure that the transaction gets done. We typically represent the sellers from our side, and Mike and some others represent the buyers. So it's important you get people that can work well together. In fact, Mike and I had an instance where the buyer was ready to throw in the towel and give up, and it just wasn't going well. And we said, no, we can figure this out. So we got together, and there's always speed bumps in every deal, and there's things that happen. I've had hygienists quit where I've had to actually go out and hire the hygienist. We've had staff quit. We've had just all kinds of different things happen. We've had Yellow Pages ads, or actually I paid the Yellow Pages out of my pocket in order to make sure the transaction gets done. I think it was like $3,000. So I guess it's slightly a plug for the brokers and for Mike's role. Is our job is to make sure that all these things get ironed out so we can get things to closing, because bankers, and I think Tyler can attest to this, that if a broker's involved, and even probably a buyer's consultant's involved, that there's higher likelihood of the transaction actually happening than if it's two dentists just trying to get it done themselves, because emotions get in the way, and things just get blown up. Tell the staff too early. We talked about that, and I think that's a wrap.
Well done, sir. Lots of stories.
30 minutes, exactly. Perfect.
You nailed it. Can you stop sharing, Rod, and then let's get into some of this. You guys, again, questions ask. This is kind of the best part of the program. You all have your questions and concerns, and honestly, the three of us probably have seen everything. And so there's probably a question out there that's burning. So let's do the ones in the chat real quick. So one of the questions asked was, I'll knock out some of these real quick. What Dentrix report to pull for associate production? For Dentrix, it's a practice analysis report, and you want to make sure that you click on the provider. So we want to know you specifically as the provider so that you can start tracking that. Your paycheck typically is dependent on some kind of production report. So anything that you can show that to the bank that you can do the production, honestly, even if you tracked it yourself every month, longhand, just something that proves that you're watching your production. I know that sounds crazy, but I could accept that at my old role. Good question, but a production by provider report for everybody else outside of Dentrix. Justin Hawley asked real quick, good question, percentage of revenue from a hygienist versus a dentist make the difference. So, just big picture, the practices that I see, the average production for hygiene is about 30%. Some brokers out there like to bake in doctor exams into the hygiene. I don't. That's doctor production. I calculate hygiene production as x-rays in the hygiene chair, the prophy, everything that goes along with hygiene I use as hygiene production. But the goal would be 30% of the practice. I think that was your question, Justin. Big picture, if you have a higher percentage in hygiene, that's a great thing. I always say that the goodwill, Rod, I mean, you could probably speak to this too. Goodwill are the people that coming into the practice through the hygiene program. That's what makes the practice and the patients sticky. It's not necessarily the doctor production. It's really the consistency of the hygiene department over the years. So would you agree with that, Rod? I mean,
yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. One of the questions that I saw was, how long does it take to get credentialing done? And that's funny that you asked that question, whoever it was. It's kind of funny. My wife's name is all the anonymous people. So it's like my wife's asking me all these questions right now. I'm surprised when one of them isn't get home and say goodnight to your kiddos. Yeah, so credentialing is tough because it takes sometimes 60 days just to get credentialed. I've been seeing 45 days because of COVID. There's a drag on the system right now. And so let's say that you close on your practice today. You could be out of network for a solid 45 days post close. So, and there was someone that was talking about fraud and credentialing. Let's talk about that a little bit. Yes, by definition, it absolutely is considered fraud. I'll go out and say that I've never had a buyer ever get sued over this or get into any trouble with the insurance companies. As long as you're communicating with them that this is what you're doing, they typically give you a period of time to get the transition done. But a lot of this topic is very debated. Again, haven't had any trouble with it personally, but Tyler, why don't you weigh in a little bit on this? I know you're the attorney in the room.
My opinion on it is, technically it is fraud. You shouldn't bill under someone else's insurance. However, the big three insurance companies that I'm aware of in the greater Pacific Northwest and and most of the country have all informally said that if it's transitory in nature, 30, maybe 60 days, that they don't have a problem with it. I've never seen it be an issue, as Mike said. It's just one of those things that if you're properly planning your transition, it can just be avoided 100%. There's plenty of time to get credentialed. And, a lot of times people will say to me, Tyler, I'm so overwhelmed. He's in network or she's in network with 23 insurance companies. And you go, that's cool. That's their disease. You don't need to make it theirs. I bet you if you triaged it, 90% of their collections come from 3 of those. So why don't you just do those 3 and then you can chip away at the other, 20 plus after closing it. And usually that's a good way to manage your time during the transition and due diligence, because otherwise it is certainly overwhelming. But it's something worth spending your time on. And there are people out there who will help you do it. But it's something that your attorney can't do for you. So you got to, you have to kind of take it on yourself.
Rod, do you want to weigh in on that from a seller's perspective? Because I know a lot of sellers, for the reason of the fraud situation, a lot of sellers don't want to do that. And I'll before you go in on that, Tyler, I'll echo what you said. Delta, of course, is the big one, and you typically can get in network with Delta pretty quickly. So the damage isn't going to be so great, but it's probably the other ones that are going to take 45 to 90 days to get you in network, and then you got to have those write-offs with the patient by billing them out of network fees and writing off the difference. But Rod, about billing through the seller, go ahead.
Yeah, and the big issue, like you're talking about, is the timing, because you don't know if the sale is going to go through, because of the bank approval, because the due diligence and everything else involved. You really don't know until like maybe 3 weeks before closing. So, and then once you know it's going to go through, then you start the credentialing 3 weeks before closing, and now you're you're overlapping time. So, and sellers, of course, typically don't like to have the buyer run their procedures through their number. So
yeah,
it's hard too, because once you start filling out the forms, a lot of times the insurance companies will send the forms to the practice. So all of a sudden the staff who didn't know is about the sale is getting stuff for some guy named Dr. Jones, who's getting credentialed in their office, and they're like, what's this? And so then the seller has to either fess up and disclose, or tell a white lie. So so it's tough. It's a really tough situation.
That's exactly the situation. Is starting the credentialing process 100% of the time it gets sent to the office. It doesn't get sent to your home address. And the greater risk is the team finding out. That is truly the greatest risk. And so it's tough. It's just navigating that process, and it does come down to the timing. I will tell you that if the seller is staying on, it's a much easier process. And Tyler, little less problematic when the seller's in the actual practice, correct?
Totally. If you have the seller working back, they're billing under their number, your risk of exposure diminishes by several orders of magnitude. So
cool. Rod, I'll have you answer this one, probably the same answer as mine. What percentage do you pay for accounts receivables 30, 60, 90 days? I know what Tyler and I ask for. You know what we ask for. You've done enough deals.
Yeah, the typical answer is it's 85% of any collected dollar amount below 90 days, and that's less any patient credits, discounts, professional credits, and those types of things on the practice, which has something to be careful of when you are looking at the AR, because some practices will have the fee schedules in the system and they're already calculated, some won't. And then I've even had practices where the doctors, you typically can get paid within a week or so from the time things are billed. So they'll actually want to go in and go account by account to back out the patient portion. So this one should be calculated net of the discount. This one should be calculated with the discount, or without the discount. So but the typical formula for a quick straight answer is 85% of everything below 90 days.
And Tyler touched on that ortho piece, so it's definitely,
yeah, ortho's a different story. Yeah,
if there's ortho, it's a whole different ball of wax. We probably need an hour just to explain that formula, but it does make things a little different. So if you do have a heavy Invisalign practice, again, just really weed through that. Get someone on this webinar to help you work through that. Dan Madden, great question. Please review formulas used to determine number of active patients. I like this question because the practice management software always says 2 years is kind of the active patient. My calculation, and I think the industry is moving towards this, is really 18 months in my opinion.
Gross collections divided by 800.
What's that?
Gross collections divided by 800.
Yeah. Perfect. There you go. Okay, there's Tyler's. So big picture, it comes down to I think to me in theory it comes back down to the hygiene patients. How often are they coming in? How many times are you seeing those hygiene patients? And so if someone hasn't come in for a hygiene check in 18 months, are they really a patient probably not. So maybe with COVID, but maybe not.
I wasn't, just to chime in, I wasn't necessarily kidding there. If you go and you pull like a month's worth of procedures by patient and you figure out what the average procedure is for an average month and figure out that dollar amount in that practice, it usually is somewhere between $600 and $900 per patient. And you can use that number as kind of the average patient of the practice and divide the gross collections by it. And usually that's a more reliable number in my experience than EagleSoft or Dentrix, but Rod would know more about it than I would.
Yeah, we conservatively use 1,000. So we just say if it's $1 million practice, there's probably 1,000 active patients, plus or minus 10%. So.
Yeah.
The only thing that skews that, guys, is if it's a robust hygiene department. Hygiene is going to drastically skew that dollar per. And then the opposite of a robust hygiene program is someone that's high cosmetic, and you're in the 1,200 per patient. So again, all good conversations, Dan. We probably kicked that horse dead, but great question. And then also Dan also asked, please comment on the valuation for specialty practices, specifically oral surgery, and especially in regards to goodwill. Rod, I could talk about that, but why don't you hit that one?
Yeah, well, historically, specialty practices, they don't sell for as much as general dental practices. And that's because the goodwill of a specialty practice is typically tied to the specialist and the referral sources that they have. So if you're getting patients from Dr. Jones down the street and they hear that you're selling your practice, they might say, well, I've been getting hit up by my buddy who's an oral surgeon, so I'm going to switch right now. So that being the case, it's not necessarily the location. General dental practice is the location and the reputation and the staff and all the other aspects of the goodwill, whereas the specialty practice is typically just the specialist. So values used to be 50 to 65%, but lately we've been valuing higher than that, probably close to 70%, 65 to 75%, I would say, in quite a few locations. So,
and it also depends. Maybe you said, sorry if you said this, I was reading some other questions, but the type of specialty. The pedos these days are patient, direct or pedos are becoming just as much GP type focused practices than a specialty. Orthos even sometimes. So any comments about that? I mean, pedos are selling almost the same as GPs these days.
Yeah, we have a backlog of buyers looking for pedo practices right now because there is a big demand for those. And Steve, who's doing startups, that's probably where he's doing the most startups because there's not many pediatric practices for sale. And the second one right behind it is we got quite a few people looking to buy ortho practices right now too. So.
Yeah. I have 5 pedo startup clients right now, 5 currently. So there's like a pedo kick out there, but yes. Okay, cool. Hopefully that helped, Dan. Paula Stepp, where do we suggest looking to buy a practice? That's to me that's a really loaded question. I mean, it depends on a lot of things: your vision, the demographics you want to serve, your drive time, competition, but the popular areas, of course, in the Puget Sound area, since we're all from the Puget Sound, is like the Bellevue, Redmond, kind of area. But I would challenge buyers just as a whole to look outside in the more or less socially popular areas. Those are gold mines. I mean, when Rod, when you list practices right outside of town where maybe somebody isn't getting the nightlife feel or whatever, maybe a little bit more rural, the outskirts of town, less competition because less people want to live there, less dentists want to live there. They're just crushing it, just absolutely crushing it. So any comments about that?
Yeah. It's if you're looking to find a nice practice where you want to make money, getting outside of the core areas is the best route to go. Not only that, you're not having your staff, competing with other companies like Microsoft and Amazon and those types of companies who are taking your assistants in front desk. They can work your front desk and make $30 an hour, or they can go to Microsoft and make $60 an hour or $50 an hour as a receptionist. So so your overhead's going to be much lower outside, rent's a lot lower, competition's a lot lower. Just so many reasons to look outside the core area. That being said, if you live in Bellevue and you want to practice in Bellevue, I haven't seen too many Bellevue dentists. So you would do just fine if you want to do in Bellevue, go to downtown as well. So.
Final notes, guys. You know, big picture, lots of activity, lots of, you know, practices for sale, lots of buyers wanting to buy. I did not expect how much activity was going to happen post-COVID. I didn't realize how the associates out there, a lot of you probably feel like you've been beat up over the last 8 months, forced to do hygiene, being furloughed, and just wanting to take your career into the next stage of your life. And I would say that as long as you're doing the right things and looking at the right things about the practice, understanding the financials and all the things we covered tonight, it's still a great time to buy a practice, no questions asked. Again, it's my passion to get people into ownership for themselves. Tyler, final comments?
You know, I do, you know, somewhere between 40 and 60 of these a year, and I've certainly counseled people, especially this year, through some tough times, but I can count on one hand the number of people who've bought a practice who say they regret it. And usually the people who regret it, it's something else going on in their life, you know, whether it's a bad marriage or some dependency issues. So it is a worthy investment, and it's something you consider. It's certainly scary, but especially right now, but I would just echo it that COVID-19 is an accelerant, and it's changed the way we're doing things a little bit, but it's just a snapshot. It just was an accelerant to get us to how we do things probably 5 or 6 years from now, just making it we're just doing it now. And so it shouldn't be something you're afraid of. You should just go, well, everyone's really on their toes. So there's never really been a better time to buy a practice, in my opinion, because everyone's being really, really thoughtful. And it's kind of put a new set of fresh eyes on these deals. That's my opinion, at least.
Rod?
Yeah, no, I would just say, you know, echoing what Tyler just said, we do hear some people being a little hesitant. They're waiting for that second round of COVID to possibly come. And, you know, my reply is, you know, the first round's not gone yet. So it's going to be here. So, and we've weathered that storm, and now we know how to weather that storm. We realize that patients still have teeth and they're going to be coming back. So, you know, that shouldn't be an issue anymore on the table. The other thing I would say, that we get buyers that look at practices and they nitpick over the littlest thing. You know, it's just like, oh, well, they don't have this type of x-ray head or this type of pano. They have you know, it's just like, well, that's 25 grand, or they, you know, the chairs need to be replaced. Well, chairs these days are $5,000 a piece. So they're really inexpensive. So, I think a lot of times buyers just look for excuses as to why not to buy a practice. But if you look in the grand scheme of things, you know, even negotiating over a $25,000 difference over your career, that's going to be like $200 a month over the next 30 years. So, you know, and go for the practice. So, so yeah, just the big message is, if you're thinking about buying a practice, you need to do it sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that does it. Thank you all for participating. I'll probably be sending a survey out. I sent an email to all of you that registered and RSVP'd of how to get a hold of one of the three of us. We're happy to help in any way possible. You know, don't feel like we're going to send you a bill. If you had some questions and you were a part of this event, we're here, happy to help, and yeah, stay healthy, stay safe, and have a happy holiday. Thanks everyone for coming on.
Thanks, everybody.